So we've heard about two very different situations of countries in periods of transformation. Now we're going to come forward to a more recent past and a very different and also tumultuous situation. Margaret, over to you. Can you get up?
I'll go around this way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. And indeed, as Ron has noted, it doesn't sound anything like either of the other two case studies that we have learned about. When I try to sort of visualize what I think Egypt looks like to American policymakers, I'm not sure that they would see that. But if you all are familiar with the traffic patterns in Northern Virginia, and you remember the Springfield interchange, that's what our foreign policy interests look like in Egypt. It is confusing, it is fast and dynamic, and it is dangerous. And all of those intersections represent some very key U.S. interests. You all probably know these, but let's just go down a little list of everything that comes together in Egypt for U.S. interests globally and especially in the region. Egypt, the sort of ballast, the center of gravity of moderate Islam and moderate Arab political activity for 30 plus years. The peace with Israel, the cornerstone of American foreign policy in the region. The war against terror, we don't call it that anymore, but a long, and this predates 9/11, but a very solid and mutually beneficial partnership on confronting violent extremism, both within Egypt, within the region, and globally. But we have also had areas of our intense desire to improve the economy of Egypt, so it is a more stable, more capable place, and a desire to see Egyptians move toward more political participation, greater respect for human rights, greater respect for religious minorities, the care for particularly their Christian and very, very tiny Jewish populations. These are important to many, many people. Ron talked about NGOs. Each one of these factors has key stakeholders. They bring their issues to the table, and it creates, as you can imagine, a very, very difficult set of issues for U.S. policymakers. I also wanted to talk a little bit about sort of two of the conditions that describe U.S. and Egypt going into this. I think now we were sort of in a state of Cold War with the Soviet Union for 30 plus years, but everybody knew their roles, and it was evolving. As Ambassador Matlock said, what had evolved in the U.S.-Egyptian relationship was, frankly, a very burdened bilateral relationship that had lost so much of the original vitality and mutual confidence at the official level, both on our side and, frankly, on the Egyptian side. We had lost all credibility to the Egyptians with the long wars in Iraq and our inability to move out of or to resolve things in Afghanistan. Our, to Egyptian official eyes, our ill-conceived notions of democracy that led to the winning of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, that and our sort of empowering of Iran. They had simply lost confidence with us in so many ways. But even more painful was the lack of understanding and respect and appreciation, frankly, on the popular level. By the time I got to Egypt, the United States was responsible for every ill. Nothing we had done in 30 years had any value to Egyptians, even though you could point to the fact that they had drinking water, the fact they had telephones, the fact that their standard of living had increased enormously. Totally forgotten. New generation, been there, weren't aware of it. So it was a very, very painful element. And on the U.S. side, as I said, we were bored with this. We were tired of Mubarak and his corrupt henchmen. And all we thought about, it sort of boiled down, as Ron said, to the issue of assistance, as if $1 billion we spend every year bought Egyptian cooperation, which it did not, never has, never will. So it was just a belief that somehow if we just use that leverage, we could get the Egyptians to jump through hoops. And it was a terribly mismatched set of public perceptions. You still hear it. I mean, the president not too long ago sort of rude the kind of problem we have in a place like Egypt, where the public holds you accountable for being friends with the Muslim Brothers or not being friends. I mean, either way, we're wrong. So it was a very, very difficult situation to go into. And frankly, I think on another level, we had, because of our preoccupations with Iraq and Afghanistan, no one could summon the intellectual energy to address the issue of transition in Egypt. It was very, very difficult. We tried to modestly encourage some thinking more long term, but it quickly devolved into the idea that, well, this is an issue for the democracy promotion people. Well, it's not. It should have been a very, very broad issue. And it sounds critical, I mean, but given what was going on at these times, it would have been very, very difficult for any administration, I think, to do this. So what it means is we're then confronted with the events of, in Egypt, January 2011, and what to do. And I want to comment, several speakers have talked about the issue of public statements and their role in democracy. One of the real dangers of this, yes, they have a role, is that so often in recent experiences, and I certainly see this in places like Egypt, the formation of a public statement becomes the forum for making policy. And often you're doing that under very, very different circumstances in the concept of a very open-ended, real basic look at what are our interests and how do we best achieve them. And, you know, one of my the most memorable day I had in my 30 plus years was in June of 2010. I'm getting these. Anyway, when President Obama came to Cairo, you saw the entire nation of Egypt, and presumably many in the Arab world, literally enthralled to this new American president and the message he brought. Unfortunately, the message was out there. It was wonderful. We lacked the resources to actually do much about implementing many of the sort of practical things, and the realities of the challenge of a Middle East peace, again, sort of detracted from what we had hoped to put out there rather than to strengthen it. So when all this stuff happened in January, no one in Egypt was looking to the United States for any guidance, for any cooperation. But what is the American reaction? Of course, we are mesmerized by this. To its credit, I think the administration was rightly cautious in those first days, even though they have been deeply criticized for that caution. They have been criticized for being too cautious and for throwing President Mubarak under the bus. I appreciate the caution, and I can assure you we didn't throw him under the bus. He managed to get under there all by himself. So it was a very, very difficult situation for us. But Americans, as you know, we got to do something. Everybody's pressing administration. So what are you going to do? How are we going to do this? What are we going to do? We send Bill Burns out within, the curfews are still on, the tires are still burning. We've still evacuated. Bill Burns has got to come in and talk to somebody, so we talks to people. The secretary comes in, and these visits are both very, very good. I understand why she wanted to come, but they raise expectations. She asked the Egyptians, so what are you going to do now, and what can we do to help? And, she met with this wide variety of people, and the answer was, basically, we don't really need your help. Oh, you can forgive our debt if you would like, but, we're in charge. We're going to do this. And that's not really quite what she wanted to hear, although I think she coped well with trying to respond to that. But so we immediately throw ourselves into this effort to try to come up with relieving their debt, which kept people up nights, and ended up with, one, we couldn't do it. We didn't have the money, so we had to piece together some little package that wasn't attractive to them. So we raised all these expectations by saying, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to give you $2 billion in OPIC guarantees. And $2 billion sounds like a lot of money until you realize there's nothing really there unless some private investor wants to come in and access it, which in the chaos of Egypt wasn't going to happen. So we rush in to try to say how wonderful we're going to be without realizing that that's not really what they wanted to hear. They much prefer the $500 million check from Qatar than to anything that we had to offer to them at the time. So it was very, very difficult. So what do we do? What have we done? What should we be doing? And I want to sort of make a little aside. I have a sort of a long-term, short-term view. I think that in the moment, in this very critical, sensitive transition period, there frankly is very little, unless you're truly brought in by the opposition and by the people of the country, there's very little U.S. diplomacy or U.S. policy can do, nor perhaps should do, to sort of try to intervene on the street, so to speak. But our long-term efforts at democracy promotion, I think, have started to pay off in not very regular and orderly fashion. But I believe that the United States has contributed enormously to changing the agenda and the environment on these issues around the world, and certainly in the Middle East. But our ability to translate that into sort of, this is what you need to do and how you need to do it, and here's a nice timeline for you, just really doesn't work. So what do? As I said, we rushed around looking for money that didn't exist. I think we were fairly cautious in our initial public statements, continually reiterating this is an issue for the Egyptian people, not for us. Trying to give them sort of guidance when the many leaders came through to do this. But it was not very satisfactory. I don't think anybody is satisfied now with what our policy in Egypt looks like and feels like, neither on the U.S. side nor on the Egyptian side. So it's as I said, it's a very, very fraught situation. One of the areas you also were talking about this new social media, and again, our very Americanness, it's somehow we know this is a global enterprise. It's the World Wide Web. But in this moment of crisis, somehow there were some who shall go nameless who truly believed we could manipulate, and they would say, well, why don't you know, Nihad from wherever who emailed me and said this. I mean, no one even knew where these people were from. Many of them were in fact from the United States. But because of the global nature of this, it is just, these are very difficult to think. Someone, when Tahrir Square had about 950,000 people in it, asked me what was I doing at that moment to influence what was happening in that square. So we get so carried away with the impulses and the desire to be involved in this that we sometimes don't have much humility and realistic nature. I guess if I could, I believe that the administration has in fact been trying to do a very cautious approach to this. The criticism that most Egyptians have now is that we embrace the Muslim Brothers and we created them. Well, I can tell you, I couldn't even get the administration to really think about whether we wanted to sort of break out and really try to reach out to the Muslim Brothers before this transition began. It was very much the Egyptian military that paved the way for their success electorally. But of course, once elected president, we're going to deal with the president of Egypt, because one of the other things that Egypt lacks currently is leadership. They simply have no experienced political class. We don't have anyone that can actually come forward in a suit and tie who can think strategically, have a plan, and go forward. So it's really a problem. And I think until that leader comes forward, we're going to be in a very sort of wait-and-see mode. How I would look at it, and I mentioned this last night, there's this book that I look at from time to time. You all probably know Elie Kaddouri's book on the Chatham House version. Rather dyspeptic and hasn't much good to say about Western moralists who want to go out and reform the Middle East. But he says, it's enough for practical men to fend off present evils and secure existing interests. That, to me, at the very minimum and the very basis, is what we need to be doing in a place like Egypt. And I would add to it, we need to manage our risks to keep as many opportunities for the future open as possible. And what that means is that we're not going to make any one group very happy for the time being. You look at, I'm still concerned. I think now is not the time for the United States to be walking away from its relationship with the Egyptian armed forces in any way, shape, or form. These are not the cradle of democracy, but I think we're going to have to give some time for a process to come forward to we'll see. The big question for us at the end will be whether or not we are going to be faced with, and then if we are we going to have to deal with a situation where it would appear that the Egyptian armed force, that we're going back to a Mubarak-style situation with very little oxygen in the political system. I hope that is not the case, but it's too soon to say. So I guess I would say that we need to sort of, at the very beginning, take a breath and try to assess what we can really do realistically. And periodically, as this transition goes on, continue to take a deep breath and try to assess what's going on. Do no harm. Keep our options open. And I think we do need to work, frankly, on developing a public statement that acknowledges this very difficult period that we're in, and the fact that these internal political issues remain Egyptian. We're going to stand by Egypt to the degree that we can, and as opportunities arise for support, we will do that. Well, the issue of democracy promotion got so antagonistic that they were putting people in jail who had accepted money from the United States to in NGOs, and we had U.S. NGO officials holed up in the ambassador's residence for weeks, fearful of arrest. It should never have gotten to that point. Whether we could have avoided it, I don't know, because no one in Egypt really came forward to defend us. And I think that it's still important that we should be able to make those offers. I doubt they're doing much of it now, but money should still be there to support people and to support capacity building where we can. But we're going to have to, I think, be guided more by what's realistic and what is capable of actually contributing to hopefully the development of the political leaders that Egypt desperately needs. I'm going to wrap this up really shortly because I could go on and on about what's happening in Egypt and isn't happening in Egypt, but I think the discussion might be of more interest. So, quick walk through Egypt. Thank you.